Global GT Championship eventually gave way to the FIA GT Championship. We had the FIA GT1 World Championship, and of course, subsequent to that, Blancpain Endurance Series, the Blancpain Sprint Series as well, and now what is Fanatec GT World Challenge. And those 30 years all represented on these grids, taking GT cars from across that 30-year period. Some modern, some older, and a wonderful assortment of cars and histories and stories and drivers we have, with the field out on track for the second qualifying period of the weekend. They get two 55-minute races, and it's a chance, yes, in part to have a look at the cars and the times and the drivers, but to wallow and to reminisce as much as anything. As you see, they're going through the Aston Martin number 5. This is the car that is being driven by Jordan Grosjean, and it's a car, like many in fact, on this grid with a Le Mans history, because this was a car that was raced in 2008. It was 16th that year, in fact, 4th in the GT1 class, but it was a Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Andrea Piccini, Carl Wendlinger entry. And as you might have expected, given that it's got Gulf colours, it's part of Royal Goethe's Rothko collection. He has this amazing collection of Gulf liveried cars, and here's yet another one to add to the stable. And Jordan Grosjean, we have seen racing in international GT events on and off over the years. The Dubai-based South African, and he comes now up towards the chicane at the end of the lap. He's going to share this car with Stuart Hall. Now, I'll tell you, it's Jordan Grosjean behind the wheel. Driver ID in this is a little on the vague side, so it's shown as Jordan Grosjean, but that's not to suggest that it's not Stuart Hall. Try and peer into cars if possible and look at crash helmets, but either way, it's going to be a competitive car. This is one of the more recent entries, and we know that Stuart Hall is very quick. Here is the Maserati MC12 of Joe Macari, which he shares with his godson, Harry Newey, who, even though we are assured he's here, he's yet to appear on any entry lists. And peering into the car, that looks like Harry Newey behind the wheel of it, looking at the Red Bull crash helmet, Adrian Newey's son. So Harry Newey, who has developed into a very, very handy sports car racer, having initially started in single-seaters, comes now down to Bruxelles. The last time Joe Macari raced here was in a Maserati MC12 in these colours, although not this chassis, back in the 2007 Spa 24 Hours, when he drove with Marino Franchitti and with Ben Orcott and with Philip Pater in the JMB run car, which carried these Red Bull colours. But the Maserati MC12, fantastic car. There is an example, Nick Homerson's car is in this entry, of the works car that came out at the end of 2004 when the likes of Andrea Bertolini, Johnny Herbert, Mika Salo drove them. And it was this car that effectively created the balance of performance, because after the MC12 arrived on the grid and its potential was there for all to see, it was Max Mosley that came up with this idea, maybe, of perhaps changing the performance of it based on the rear wing, on the weight, on the ride height, and effectively that was what created, that's what morphed into the balance of performance. It was a rather crude version of it that he and Peter Wright at the FIA came up with, but that was the catalyst, if you like. This car, that way of trying to bring its pace back a little bit to let others compete against it, that gave us the ultimate balance of performance. Now, ahead of it is one of the oldest cars on the grid, that 911 GT2 Evo. It's the 993 iteration of the Porsche. And that car does take you back to the BPR days, and that chassis particularly, a Bob Wallach, Vito Rösler, Franz Conrad car, and it was a Conrad entry, as you can tell off the colour scheme, the familiar turquoise of Franz Conrad, the Austrian Formula 3 champion, inveterate enthusiast, and the Evo with that huge rear wing on the back. This car, which is now owned by Peter Fairbairn and Paul McLean, who are big, big Porsche enthusiasts, but this is a car that raced in the BPR series back in those early days, and the 911 GT2 makes its way down the hill, down towards Eau Rouge. Fastest at the moment, number 47, which is the Ivan Verkuter Alex Müller Maserati MC12 in the Vitaphone colours. Michael Bartels, who was the man behind Vitaphone Racing, is here running the car, but he doesn't own one these days, but the team still exists and he's operating them for customers. And Alex Müller, of course, raced them in period as well. So as you look at the Porsche, the best lap times both coming out of the Maseratis at the moment, and we've got 23 cars on the circuit. Yesterday we had 25 of them out on track, so I suspect that we've got one or two more to shake out of the pit lane. There is the works colours. You just caught a glimpse of it in the background of the Maserati MC12. and 24 heading down the hill, which is Stéphane Rattel's Lamborghini Murcielago, which is now being driven by Jos Menton. Now that's another change, so another late change to the entry list, and Jos Menton, experienced Belgian driver, behind the wheel of this car that didn't go out yesterday, although it is owned by Stéphane. He is a bit on the busy side, so he's found somebody to put in it. The initial plan was that Christopher Hauser might be able to drive it, because he raced this car in period as partner to Peter Cox, but Christopher, now very much an Audi driver, wasn't really smiled upon by the Audi management, so he isn't able to drive a Lamborghini. But Jos Menton at the wheel will be a man to watch. And he comes up behind the early Viper, which is the car that Jean-Luc Blanchemin drives. This car with a FIA GT and a Spa 24-hour pedigree, the blue and yellow Viper, ex-Vincent Voss chassis, long before the days of WRT, but Vincent, when he was a up-and-coming racer, and of course did win the Spa 24 Hours. In the background, number 98 Lamborghini out of the European Le Mans Series, that car, the Gallardo, which Raoul Goethe drives and owns and shared with at the time Fred Fatien and Jordan Grogor. Well, we've talked about Jordan, and Fred Fatien is represented this weekend not necessarily elsewhere on this grid, but in the 24 Hours, because he's the man behind GP Extreme, which runs the Martini liveried Porsche. So Jos Menton pressing on, having not driven this car yesterday. He did drive it, I'm sure, or did drive Lamborghinis in the FIA GT1 World Championship. So being thrown into the car and delivering. So let's see what he can do. This bringing you into the more recent era when the FIA GT1 World Championship ran as the two 1-hour sprint races. And in a sense, GT1 had a part to play in the development of the Spa 24 Hours, because with those cars only racing for two 1-hour blasts, what do you do with the 24 Hours? So the first year that the GT1 World Championship came here of 2010, the 24 Hours was for a mixture of GT2, GT3 and GT4 cars as a one-off standalone race, and it was from that, without GT2, which was dying out really, that the Blancpain Endurance Series was born, which in turn after a season became GT3 only. Cars from the American Le Mans Series represented. There is an absolute time warp, one of, for my money, the best GT car and colour combinations ever, the Vitaphone livery, which initially adorned Celine's in GT racing, and then the Maserati. Michael Bartels and Andrea Bertolini wrapped up FIA GT Championships, FIA GT1 World Championships, and this car, which also raced in the Red Bull colours. Joe Macari drove that chassis, but this is the car that's now, for the purposes of this weekend, being driven by Alex Muller and the owner, Yvan Vercouter. It is a car that was raced in the FIA GT1 World Championship by Enrique Bernoldi, and Miguel Ramos, who's also racing in this year's 24 Hours. The MC12s, after the works cars came along at the end of 04, had to have that rear wing dropped somewhat, and into the pit lane goes the Vitaphone liveried car, as there the works factory coloured car goes over the line. That is, sorry, not the factory car, I'll tell you live, the Red Bull colours, the JMB car. Number 14 is James Sofronas with the 2013 Audi R8. So now you're into GT3 world, and this car in the American colours, the sort of car that had great success in partly Pirelli World Challenge in the States, but also, of course, in the FIA GT3 European Championship and Blancpain Endurance Series as it was at the time. James Sofronas comes up the hill out of Raidillon, and currently 7th fastest. He is due to go solo in that car. It's very patriotic roof, and comes then now up into Les Combes. So James with the road to himself here, makes that run downhill once again. So as I say, 23 cars we have for this session, and we've gained one overnight because the 26th on the entry list didn't venture out yesterday. I'll try and deduce which ones we've lost, but I fear one of them might be Mark Sumpter, Lee Maxted Page's Porsche. That I can't account for just at the moment. And another one that I don't think is making itself apparent is the Jean-Luc Rion Nick Padmore 911 GT3 RSR, which in Nick Padmore's hands certainly should be a quick car. Anyway, James Sofronas goes downhill and is in danger of catching traffic here because he's got the Harry Newey, Joe Macari Maserati up the road. The way that the races work out, there is a pit window and the owner needs to do the start, as far as I'm aware. Yes, you can do one driver, one race if you so wish, but the majority of those shared cars are going to have a driver change, and the owner needs to do 50% of the race. So in theory, the owner will be the start driver. So the Audi pounds its way up towards Blanchimont. This 45-minute session, clock ticks on down. And the way that the grid works out is that it is the combination of your best lap in Q1 and in Q2. It's not one driver, one session, and it's not the driver's best lap, it's the car's best lap. But you take the best two and put them together, and that's the way the grid forms. Almost got a bit leery there in the traffic coming through the chicane. Of course, the chicane itself reprofiled many times through the history of the SRO's organisation in GT racing. From the ADAC GT Championship, the Chevrolet Corvette. This is Mirko Zeiler at the wheel of it. And I think I'm right in saying is Tony Zeiler's son, who raced in the early days of BPR and FIA GT, as well as in historics. And this car, again, a recent GT car, as you can gather from its livery and the sponsorship coming out of the ADAC GT Championship, flicks through the chicane, heads up towards the timing line. This grid put together by Peter Auto, Patrick Peters' company that looks after a number of historic race events, and every time a historic grid is needed at an SRO event, the phone in Patrick Peters' office rings, and his little black book of contacts prevails upon this grid. Now, here downhill is number 70 Porsche, the 997 of Paul Phillips. And this is potentially a car that he has had himself for many, many seasons. Paul Phillips has been a regular racer of Porsches in all sorts of different championships, great enthusiast, and will have raced them here in things like the Le Mans Series, the European Le Mans Series, the Intercontinental Le Mans Cup, and now a busy racer of them in historic events, because year by year they get that little bit older, they become more applicable for historic races. And it's, off the road, number 99 Porsche, the Kelly Moss Motorsport car. Now that was up at Bruxelles. Simon Evans, the driver, the British driver, and this car looked after by the Jordan Racing team, and downhill it comes in the Stars and Stripes colours from the American Le Mans Series. It was last raced in the States, really, in the Sebring 12 Hours, when it had a half-shaft fail, and it put David Murray, Anthony Lazzaro and Vincenzo Sospiri out of the race, and then it was sold into Europe when Noel Del Bello drove it for a time. Number 7 there, the Aston Martin, that car of Alexander Lienau and Stefan Jocher, the bright yellow car, was the Darrell Young chassis that he raced in 2012 in the FIA GT Cup at Macau. And ahead of him, further up the road, is the charging number 5, the Stuart Hall Jordan Grogor Aston Martin. So GT1 ahead of GT3 here. And in the spectacular colour scheme that so many cars run in Asia, the yellow and green Aston flicks through the chicane. You've got the 996 Porsche behind coming up towards the line. So the Alex Muller time, I think it must be Alex behind the wheel, to do a 2:16.7 is the fastest in this session. Yesterday, the quickest car again was that on a 2:18.9. Now that is Jean-Luc Blanchemin, who we get used to seeing in GT3 and GT4 categories these days, but this Viper heads down the hill. The car that Vincent Voss shared with Eric Ellery and Emmanuel Clerico throughout the FIA GT Championship, and notably the Spa 24 Hours. You see the FINA sponsorship on it, the Belgian petrol company that was always a mainstay of 24-hour grids in the time, whether it was for European touring cars or then FIA GT. The Spa 24 Hours, of course, had been a touring car race for many, many years, dipping in and out of the European Touring Car Championship, and oddly one year the World Endurance Championship. But after touring car regulations, after Group A became all rather fragmented, it ran as a production saloon car Group N style race for a few seasons. And when a Peugeot 306 won, I think people rather gave up on the idea of saloon car racing. So the RACB went to Stefan Rattad and said, what can we do about this? And Stefan was able to bring GT racing to the 24 Hours, and it's never looked back, this event. Up towards the timing line comes the Viper. So Jean-Luc Blanchemin goes through. Still makes a wonderful sound, the Chrysler Viper, or as it was in the States, the Dodge Viper. Just sings past you and comes then now out of La Source. Wails its way down the hill. And then down towards the Eau Rouge Radion section. And apart from the fact that it teeters off the road a little bit, and Eau Rouge has been reprofiled so many times, again, you could be going back 20-odd years. Now here is Philippe Kaddouri making his way up towards the chicane, the Hong Kong driver in the Aston Martin DBR9, the ProDrive built car that he's not raced before. It was a car that was sold into the American market. Philippe Kaddouri, who's got a nice collection of AC Cobras and the like, and also raced for a time in Lamborghini Super Trofeo with Dan Wells, comes over the line. And Philippe Kaddouri 10th. Turns his way out of La Source then. So in the Works colour scheme, ProDrive built these cars, of course, taking all the engineering lessons out of the Ferrari 550 Maranello and making it an even better prospect. And the project led by George Howard Chappell, so they took on FIA GT races and of course took the cars to Le Mans as well. This is a 2006 car, and Philippe Kaddouri then makes his way up towards Les Combes. So it's a Maserati 1-2 in terms of the time. Aston Martin 3rd, Maserati 4th. 5th, we've not really got to him yet, but he's out there. Stefan Ortelli in a genuine Ortelli chassis, one of his WRT cars from around 2014-2015. It's in the pit lane at the moment, as also is Richard Mine's Aston Martin. Bit of dust and gravel brought onto the circuit up at Bruxelles there. James Sofronas, that we were looking at earlier on in the Stars and Stripes Audi, he's had a lap time deleted. And downhill comes Kaddouri right now, then turns his way into Pouin. So Philippe Kaddouri is 10th. Still got 24 minutes of the session to go. And as I say, although there are times being set, it's more just a case of wallowing looking at cars, isn't it? So the Aston, which always had a pretty stellar driver lineup, likes of Peter Cox, Darren Turner amongst them, comes then now. David Brabham was another, of course, comes up towards Blanchimont. We've got the Ferrari just up the road ahead, the Ferrari F430, which is Guy Fauver's car, which looks far more standard in comparison, doesn't it? But the 430, the GTC Evo, a 2007 car, comes through the chicane. We're building 430s for GT2, for GT3, and the Aston is about to go storming by, and Philippe Kaddouri goes up to 9th fastest then as he breaks the beam there, goes through. So while the Aston rounds La Source, what else do we have? 1 or 2 in the pit lane at the moment. And Guy Fauver comes down towards Eau Rouge. The Ferrari looking remarkably standard in comparison to some GT cars at the time. We've got more about to emerge in the background, including, just coming out of the pit lane, 81, Eddie Benezet's Mercedes-Benz GT3 car. Right, there is Stefan Ortelli in the Audi with the mighty rear wing, the red rear wing on the car, going up towards Les Combes. So Stefan Ortelli back out on track. The Ferrari of Guy Fauver is 19th out of the 23 that we've got in the order at the moment, but the car circulating, it's not going to be up in pole position, but it's good to have that car as he comes then now down to Bruxelles. Stefan Ortelli there in the Audi, working his way through traffic as well. You can see the way that the Porsches evolved from the 911, 993 iteration through 996s and 997s, getting ever more swoopy. The Mercedes in the background, the GT3 from 2011, so one of the early cars, relatively speaking. Right, there's Stefan Ortelli coming up towards us. He's 5th fastest at the moment. And that's the Ferrari of Guy Falva. The race divided, as you would anticipate, through the different categories of the time. So there's a GT1, a GT2 and a GT3 class. And the Ferrari, one of those late GT2 cars. But GT2 eventually fell away once the GT1 World Championship had been created and there was the GT3 European Championship. The GT2 teams didn't really have a home. There was a plan to run a European Championship for the GT2 cars, but it didn't really take off. It didn't really happen at all. So apart from the Spa 24 Hours of what year was it, 2010, GT2 racing faded away. So the cars haven't really been seen in anything other than historic events since about 2010 itself. So 18th the Ferrari was, 17th it now is in the session times. So Le Mans winner and Spa 24 Hours winner, Stefan Ortelli, goes downhill. His Spa 24 win came in what was then an NGT class car. At the time you had GT and NGT. So NGT were the rather less modified cars, but was it 03 he won it? The Freisinger Porsche, with mixed weather conditions and a perfect pit strategy, was able to give Stefan Ortelli an outright win. This Audi, the LMS Ultra from 2014-2015, the car that he shared in endurance races with Frank Stippler and Stefan Rakelmi, and comes then now down to Bruxelles. Stefan Ortelli, along with the Christophers, Mies and Hasse was the first Blockpan Endurance Series champion. Those heady days when it was WRT versus the Mark VDS team, with initially the BMW Z4. Some great battles between the two Belgian teams, but Audi, with a bit more resource, tended to prevail. And so now downhill into Pouhon comes Stefan Ortelli. So from that period, you've got Stefan racing this weekend, Stefan Ortelli, and Bas Leinders, who was the player manager at Mark VDS, running Inception Racing's McLaren within the 24 Hours. So you can't keep them away. Down through Campus comes Ortelli. I don't think this lap's going to be an improvement, in fairness, but it is going to be a decent one. And again, it's really the races that people are more concerned about. Yes, you give the owners the track time, but always in the case of running historic racing cars, everything's crossed to make sure that they survive qualifying, because these are complicated bits of kit. They're expensive to buy, expensive to run as well, and it's not just a case of getting out the toolbox. You need the laptop and all the different software systems to really exploit them and get the best out of them, even to start them on occasions. So Stefan Ortelli, with 18 minutes on the clock, comes up towards the timing line. This, in terms of sectors, hasn't been suggesting an improvement, but let's see what it is come the end of the lap. He goes through a 2:26. And so he is 4th if you take the best lap of Q1 and Q2 together. Now more Porsches, the Auto Orlando Sport car here, down to the chicane. This is Maurizio Frati's car. Big lock-up as it goes into La Source. It is on the timing screen as number 276. On the car it says 176, so place your bets. But Auto Orlando Sport did win, if you remember, the very first Blockpan Endurance Series race at Monza with the perfect fuel-saving strategy. This car is out of the European Le Mans Series, but the Italian Porsche team, very, very experienced in running Porsches. This, the GT3 RSR from the 996 iteration. And Maurizio Frati, 14th currently in the times. He's got a whole wave of traffic ahead of him, including there Jos Menton, who has slowed right down. There's no full course yellow that I'm aware of, but suddenly everybody has gone slowly into Les Combes. So 24, Jos Menton, 8th fastest, and he's the kind of roadblock that Maurizio Frati has come across now. But the Porsche will go through on the inside of Bruxelles. There are no yellow flags, so you can't overtake, but I just wonder whether Menton has got a problem there, sadly, in the Stefan Rattel-owned Lamborghini. Comes out of Bruxelles. And we've got the best lap time for number 3 deleted, which is Stefan Ortelli. So Stefan Ortelli in strife. This is the GT3 Mercedes, number 81. You can see the car of Eddie Benazet, the French driver, a 2011 chassis. So the earlier iteration of the Mercedes GT3 project, the SLS. But again, there were lots and lots of these. The type of car that won the 24 Hours here, for example, with Maxi Goetz, Maxi Buch, and Bernd Schneider. The two Maxis racing Mercedes of different teams this weekend as well. But Eddie Benazet in this ultra-smart AMG liveried car up towards the left at Blanchimont, another GT3 class car, so won't have the same pace as the GT1s necessarily. But it is a car, a type of car, with a hugely important part to play in GT3 racing, not only in terms of winning in the 24 Hours of Spa, but also the European Championship with the two Maxis. Maxi Goetz went off to do DTM, has come back to GT racing. Eddie Benazet then up towards the timing line, and the Mercedes goes through. 14th he is. There's a fair old spread of times, it must be said, but I think most people are going to find somebody to battle against. And with a number of cars having two drivers, that means that there's, during the pit stop window, going to be a driver change, and potentially cars will run at different paces. That's the Joe Macari and Harry Newey Maserati once more, which is the JMB Red Bull coloured car, which we did have Harry Newey in earlier on. Joe Macari, the owner of this car, he's got this wonderful prestige car dealership in London. Came out of club racing in the mid to late 80s when the Toyota Super Road Saloon Championship existed, and he drove a Colt Lancer Turbo in it, then had a few years away, came back, having built up his business in GT and historic racing. Joe has raced at Le Mans, raced here in a Maserati MC12, like I said earlier on, but has only done about 7 races really since 2007, but delighted to be back, and with his T-shirt of the time from 2007, which was then badged as Orcott Racing, and the T-shirt with his and Ben Orcott, Marino Franchitti and Philip Pater's names on the back has survived all these years, and it's been dug out of the cupboard to be worn this weekend. The Aston Martin in the middle here, the Aston Martin young driver car, again going back to the FIA GT1 days. A spare chassis, so I'm told, so not one that did much racing, but a spare chassis that the team had, and the car driven by Frans Wunderlich, who is the mustard magnate. So Frans Wunderlich turns his way up now through the Cours Paul Frère. It was a Thomas Enger, Stefan Rossina car of the time, the young driver colours, but this, as I say, the spare chassis. 13 more minutes on the clock. Wunderlich comes up now to the chicane, 16 fastest he is. Comes in a little deep, but it doesn't really matter. He's able to get away with that up towards the timing line. Nick Homerson, number 33, Maserati, going back a little bit quicker in the factory colours. Stefan Ortelli is up to 3rd now. In the background, the Jordan Grosjean Stuart Hall Aston Martin goes through, and there is Nick Homerson. Now, Nick came out of the Donkervoort Cup, but was a mainstay of Blancpain Endurance for many, many years with Louis Machiels. They drove together, winning Pro-Am titles on more than one occasion. And it's only really in the last couple of years that Nick Homerson has stood down from modern-day racing. But again, he's got a lovely collection of cars, and I think I'm right in saying he's got a road-going MC12 as well as a race one. But arm out of the window to say thank you for giving me racing room. I hope that's what it was all about. You don't find terribly many gentlemanly racers these days doing that, especially out of a closed car. It's not the easiest thing to do. So Nick Homerson looking good in the sectors, in fact, here, trying to take the fight to the car of Alex Muller, and I think now Ivan Vercouter is behind the wheel of it, because its last lap was a 2:29 as against a 2:16. So that's got Am rather than Pro written all over it. Nick Homerson comes up out of the Cours Paul Frère. and will make that run towards Blanchimont now then. The Ferrari engined Maserati MC12, which brought them very much back onto the international sports car racing map. And they hit the ground running with the final 3 events of the 2004 FIA GT Championship. Cars, for example, raced at that first event in Dubai at the Autodrome. Over the line goes Nick Homerson, stays second, but with a better lap time. Last time around a 2:20.232. In fact, no, it was slower that time around. And he, whoops, oh so nearly gets involved there with number 77 Porsche, which is Michael Ehrlich's car, the Swiss driver. The 997 Porsche. Michael Ehrlich gets out of the way, but there was almost a difference of opinion going around La Source there, but the Maserati prevails. Stefano Ortelli back into the pit lane. Jos Menton, perhaps not surprisingly, has brought the Blancpain liveried Lamborghini back into the pit lane. And Jean-Luc Blanchemin, Simon Evans and Paul Phillips are in as well. Number 98 then goes through. The Lamborghini of Roel Goethe, who's got one of his sons racing in the 24 hours, Benji Goethe. And Roel himself, we've seen on and off in top-line GT racing, but it's largely in historic events that he competes now. But he's always had this great love affair with Gulf liveried cars. It was many, many years ago that he decided he'd start a collection, but didn't know what to collect. And it was suggested by Duncan Hamilton that maybe it would be a good idea to, sorry, Adrian Hamilton, Duncan's son, it would be a good idea to have a theme. What about Gulf liveried cars? And so it has grown, and it has grown, and it has grown. And there are very few that aren't in the collection these days. Stuart Hall looks after the Rothko collection for him, as well as drives the cars. And Roel Goethe himself has, over the years, got faster and faster and faster as well. And of course, if you're wondering about Delaney written on the side, well, if you go back to the fabled Steve McQueen Le Mans movie, which probably did more for Gulf and for Porsche than anything else, his character was Michael Delaney. So that's the link. I think it was a separate business that needed a title, so they opted for Delaney. Through it goes, up towards the left-hander at Blanchimont. Roel Goethe is currently 8th in the times here in the Lamborghini Gallardo that gave way to the Huracan. 9 more minutes are on the clock. Into the chicane comes the Lamborghini, and on this lap, Roel Goethe not as quick in sectors 1 and 2 as he had been. So he'll get the mileage out of this, but it won't be an improved lap time. Comes through now, breaks the beam, and the Lamborghini stays 8th fastest. James Sofronas up to 6th, incidentally, in his star-spangled Audi. There it is. Which I think, looking at the windscreen strip, has either still been a period race or not long since been retired off. Comes out of the Fanatec GT World Challenge America entry. So James Sofronas then presses on, and all lap times for Nick Homerson deleted for track limits now. All lap time deleted for track limits, and the same is true of number 14, James Sofronas. We're looking at him, so all lap times deleted. Dear oh dear, the track limits are being monitored very, very tightly now, therefore. Up to the line comes Sofronas. Porsche off the road coming out of Speaker's Corner. That's the Freisinger Yukos liveried car, one of the 2 out of Le Mans that year, which is the 04 chassis, the 996. Another Stefano Ortelli car. His and Ralph Kellener's and Romain Dumas' entry was 13th that year. 005 pressing on. The Jordan Grugor, Stuart Hall Aston. Right, Nick Homerson's team manager, which I think is Michael Bartels, is being summoned to the race director about these track limits. be nice to know whether it is Jordan or Stewart doing the time in this car, but either way, the Rothgo Aston comes downhill, the 2006 chassis. It was fourth in GT1 at Le Mans that year, this car. And as it heads towards the pith path, we are looking at just 6 more minutes of the session to go now. So the Gulf Aston into Cours Paul Frère. And as we've identified, there are quite a number of Aston Martins within the entry. We can tell if they were factory cars out of Le Mans because they ran in the 00 numbers. So 005 as it was, goes into Blanchimont now. And then to the chicane. But it's going to be a slower lap here from the Jordan Grosjean-Stuart Hall entry into the chicane now. Jordan, who did his racing in South Africa before going to the Middle East, where he worked for Leon Price, who himself raced in the early days of Blancpain Endurance. And Stuart Hall, second generation racer, his father Peter Hall, very, very successful production saloon car and then touring car racer, and through ICS was a prolific sponsor of Andy Rouse. Now this Aston Martin is another Le Mans car, and it's, although in Vitaphone colours, not one that Vitaphone ever raced as such. It was a Stracker racing car, but out of the European Le Mans series, Vitaphone had got an entry into Le Mans, but it didn't really fit for them, so they didn't take up the offer. But Stracker Racing wanted to race at Le Mans and didn't have an entry, so a deal was reached. So the car was put into the Vitaphone colours, and it was driven for Stracker by Nick Leventis of the Stracker Racing family, Alexandre Negrão and Peter Hardman. It retired from the race, but it was a Stracker Racing come Vitaphone Racing entry. It looks good in the colours as the car goes then out of La Source, down now towards the Eau Rouge Radion section of the circuit. And has it got a problem because Richard Mines, who's the car's owner, and again he's got an amazing collection of cars, slows right down there, jinks around a little bit. So yes, there is a problem with that car, and it pulls off at the bottom of the hill. That's a great shame because it's one of the smartest liveries out of the Astons, and I think he'd identified coming down the hill that there was an issue. The car comes to a halt. So it's out of harm's way. It's near the vehicle access gate, so that's disappointing. Richard Mines out of the session. So there's a yellow flag out at turn 2. This Aston that we looked at earlier on, the ex-Darilo Young car of Stefan Joche and Alexander Linau, comes up to the chicane, and it's 19th in the times. But they have a race this afternoon, these cars, so I'm a little bit fearful about the Aston, but the team no doubt will set to work. Richard Mines, another driver that came out of road saloon racing, a bit like Joe Macari, but over the years has moved up and up and up through the racing ranks, and very, very successful in historics, particularly around Goodwood. So there the GT3 Aston heads downhill, and the 911 GT2, which we looked at earlier on, indicator going. The Conrad Motorsport car comes then now into Les Combes, and behind in the number 115 Porsche, that's the Mark Davis Christian Glazel car, which is, again has got a Conrad feel to it looking at the colour scheme. Christian Glazel and Mark Davis, both prolific historic racers. Christian Glazel shown as being the driver behind the wheel. Comes out of Bruxelles, whether it's sports cars, Grand Prix cars or GT cars, they both go very well, those two. Belgian dealer, Mark Davis. Right, there's a lot of smoke coming out of the GT2 up the road. So this car of Paul McLean and Peter Fairbairn, oh dear, more smoke coming through Pouhon. It's a good job the session's only 2 minutes away, because I don't think that car's going to go a great deal further. It's got half decent pace, but the smoke is a concern very definitely right now. Another belch of smoke comes out of the pith path. So the two of them, it's fascinating to see the way the shape of the 911 evolved, wasn't it? From the 993 through to the 996, and then again to the 997, and it's kept on evolving through the 991, the 992, up towards Blanchimont-les-Camps. So, assuming he knows about all this smoke, the Paul McLean, Peter Fairbairn 911 ought to dive for the pit lane, because it's one fears not doing it any good. Whether it's bodywork against the tyre, hard to gauge, but it stays out. Okay, so coming out of the corner, I don't think there was much lean going on there necessarily, but again, there's another puff of smoke. So over the line it goes, and either Mark Davis or Christian Glazel behind, looking a little bit nervous here about what to do, because might be that he's getting a slightly dirty screen. And even though it's a troubled car, only now really does the 996 think about trying to get past. But actually, when it goes all right, that 911 GT2, so it's got the pace to pull clear again. There is Frans Wunderlich's Aston in the background going slowly. And Harrison Newey has put this car now second fastest, the Joe Macari car, last time around. He did a 2:18.970. For reasons that are completely unknown, Harry Newey has yet to appear on an entry list. So, although he's in the car, nobody seems to really have accepted that he's here. And he's going to be very, very rapid, as you can tell in that. He is still a couple of seconds away from Alex Muller's top time, but a 2:18.970 is impressive. Takes all sorts. To the end of the session comes then the Maserati. The flag is out. So those that have survived will take the flag on the road. Quite a few are in the pit lane, although we've got, bizarrely, a couple that have gone on an out lap right at the very end. But it's another lap of experience, I guess, for some of them that may not know Spa that well. Spa does have its 6 hours historic race weekend, the 6 hours on the Saturday night into the darkness, and then shorter races all through Saturday and Sunday as well. So quite a few of these drivers will know the circuit, not necessarily in these cars. Right, that's definitely not bodywork against the tyre, is it? That is getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, off it pulls. Oh dear. So again, that might not be a car that we see for race one. To the chicane comes Philippe Kaduri, who has got himself up to 10th, a little bit sideways there as he flicks the car into the chicane. Comes up towards the line, and as he does so, takes the flag. So the Hong Kong driver goes by, takes the flag now. So Alex Muller in the Vitaphone liveried Maserati, very much the star of the session. And here the Mark Davis, Christian Glazel car also making its way to the checkered flag. We've had another car losing lap times for track limit offences, and it's this one, in fact. It's the Glazel Davis Porsche. And into the pits it comes. So the Fujifilm sponsored car for the pit road. FIA GT, of course, that went to some very interesting venues in its time, whether it was around Argentina, whether it was the streets of Bucharest, whether it was to Japan. Stefano Ortelli then did go back out and improve last time. In fact, he's taken the flag, so he should be in this lap, but last time he did a best lap of 2 minutes 20.642. So fourth fastest he is. We don't see that much of Stefano Ortelli these days, but it's good to have him on this grid. Makes his way down now to the chicane, and then into the pit lane he will come. So we've got used to seeing Audi R8s with great success. You forget just how long they've been on the GT3 grid, don't you? And this is one of the Evo cars, the Ultra, the Mercedes SLS AMG GT3 of Eddie Benazet, 13th in the session, comes to the chicane. I think he's still got to take the flag, in fact, but and he will come and goes for the pit lane. Yes, so work done. So at the end of the session, great variety on the track, and wonderful to see some of the cars, whether it was the Chrysler Viper or the Lamborghini from a decade apart. The Viper from the early noughties, and from a decade on from the FIA GT1 World Championship, the Lamborghini, the Murcielago. From the German GT Championship, the Chevrolet Corvette that Mirko Zeiler drove, and James Sofronas with the very recent Audi pressed on, although was in strife with track limit abuses. It was a bit crowded to begin with when the cars went out onto the circuit, but Alex Muller in the Vitaphone colours managed to find clear track space, worked his way through the traffic and would go fastest on a 2:16. He was 2 seconds quicker than anybody else, and now as then, the Vitaphone Maserati at Spa is going to take some stopping. Stefano Ortelli improving his lap time to be third in the very end. The GT3 Audi getting past the 911 GT2 Porsche. Stefano Ortelli reunited with an Audi R8 and with a WRT chassis. Off the road, the Yukos liveried Porsche, number 76, the car that Jean-Louis Rion and Nick Padmore share. Although that car didn't get more than really one lap in, I don't think, so that car in trouble, as also was the Mark Sumpter and Lee Maxton Page Porsche, which didn't go out in that session either. So Alex Muller the fastest from Harrison Newey, and then Stefano Ortelli third. The Stuart Hall, Jordan Grogor, Aston Martin finishing the session fourth. And then Richard Mines, before his problems hit, fifth quickest and sixth fastest, being Roel Goethe. Seventh, Jos Menton, who has also now gained a co-driver. So Stefan Rossina put into that car with Jos Menton. Eighth being Philip Kadori, Mirko Zeiler ninth, and rounding out the top 10, number 86, Porsche of the Austrian drivers, Michael Firvini and Stefan Reutmeier. They in turn were ahead of Mark Davis and Christian Gleisel, Franz Wunderlich 12th from Eddie Benezet, Maurizio Frate and Guy Falver. Jean-Luc Blanchemin's charismatic Viper 16th, ahead of the opposition, with a couple of cars that we didn't see in that session with work to do. Join us later on for the first of the two races as we celebrate 30 years of SRO organising GT racing.